A slender red-haired woman wrapped in a warm blanket sat in a silver metallic wheelchair. Next to her on the green lawn stood a golden retriever named Jackie. The dog seemed to be waiting for something. Cassandra O'Donoghue bit into a large, juicy piece of a bright red apple with a green side. Its vibrant color stood out against her pale, freckled skin. The woman felt uneasy. Lately, she had been dreaming of her late husband, Anton, over and over again. He was silently trying to warn her about something, but she couldn't grasp what he was trying to tell her. Her dream always ended abruptly, when Anton, struggling to open his tightly clenched mouth, attempted to speak. In her dream, Anton would just look at her with his warm, sky-blue eyes, reflecting unbearable longing and sadness. But what troubled her most was the panic, almost terror, buried deep in his gaze. It was enough for Cassandra to understand, to feel his warning. But what was it about? What should she expect? What form would Anton's fear take in reality? She desperately wanted to know, and preferably as soon as possible. In the distance, beyond the fence, a tall, athletic figure appeared. His thick red hair was tied back in a ponytail. He walked closer, striding with the confident pace of an athlete. The man Cassandra saw was her son. Bill had inherited a cursed gift from his father. He possessed immense power, dangerous, formidable, and, in untrained hands, destructive. The power of a white mage given to fight evil. Like his father, Anton, Bill was tall, red-haired, and handsome. He looked like he was in his 20s, though he was actually 35. Maybe it was due to good genes, or perhaps he just had the face of a cheerful, carefree boy. Seeing her son returning from his daily run, he was always keeping himself in shape. Noticing his furrowed brow, which unintentionally made him look older, Cassandra thought that trouble had arrived and was now knocking on her door. "What happened?" she asked Bill when he came closer. She could always read his face easily. Her maternal instincts were strong, which was why Bill always confided in her without holding back. "Sullivan needs my help, and I'm going to help him. I know I shouldn't interfere in your matters if fate is calling you, but I can't keep quiet. Son, that damned place with the cursed house. It destroyed your father, your grandfather, and they were very strong." Cassandra looked at Bill with deep concern. "It's my duty, Mom. You know I was born to fight against evil. My power was given to me to prevent darkness from taking over the small world." "I know, Bill, son. I'm not trying to dissuade you. Just be careful, all right? I can't bear another loss. I think the spirits of your ancestors, including your father and grandfather, would agree with me." Bill kissed his mother on the forehead, then stepped onto the porch. As he opened the transparent glass door, he glanced back to see his weary mother and said, "I'll tell you everything after." Cassie closed her eyes wearily. With a heavy sigh, she drifted into distant, happy memories. Anton, the past, her lost happiness. In moments like these, only memories brought her solace. After sitting there for a while longer, with a slightly melancholic smile, she turned the wheelchair around and went up the ramp to the porch, then inside the house. Cory had dozed off in the car, not expecting it of herself. But with nightmares tormenting her so often, she found herself sleeping during the day, sometimes stealing a couple of hours of rest after lunch. The car came to a stop, and Zarak, turning back, leaned towards the sleeping Cory and patted her on the shoulder, saying, "Sleepyhead, wake up." His voice was surprisingly gentle, and as Cory woke up, she almost mistook his voice for Dawn's, who had just been in her dream. She mumbled softly, not quite aware of where she was, as she hadn't fully woken up yet. "Honey, can I nap for just 5 more minutes?" Zarak chuckled. He understood that Cory probably mistook him for her brother, but he still shattered her sleepy reverie, grumbling,
"Miss March, if you don't wake up, I'll carry you out of the car and drop you right on the grass."
His sharp words and tone snapped Cory fully awake. It was as if someone had doused her with a bucket of icy water. She opened her sleepy, slightly puffy eyes and looked at Zarak with childlike indignation, asking, "Are we there?" "Yeah, we've been here for a while." Zarak replied, turning away so as not to look at her innocent, supposedly offended expression. Zarak left the car first. After him, Cory rushed out, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. The cottage, small and white with a large veranda by the front door, stood by a little lake. Solitary, it looked very cozy. The travelers approached the front door. Zarak rang the doorbell, which emitted a faint, dying chime somewhere deep inside, as if starved of energy. It was strange that such a quiet chime could be heard, but within a minute the door swung open, revealing a broad-shouldered, red-haired young man dressed entirely in black. His pale face, speckled with a few freckles on the nose, looked a bit tired, but in his soft features there was a stern, unyielding determination. "Hey, Zarak," Bill said with a cheerful and polite tone. "And this must be Cory?" "Yes, I'm Cory March. And you are?" "Bill, your gloomy companion's best friend," the young man replied with a smile. "She's brave," he thought as he shook her cold hand. "Come in, we have a lot to discuss." Zarak and Cory stepped through the open door. The living room was warm. In a wicker rocking chair sat a beautiful, though no longer young, woman who eyed them sternly. She was seated across from a fireplace where a weak fire crackled. The woman warmed her thin, wrinkled hands over the flames. Bill spoke up. "This is my mother, Cassandra. Ever since Dad passed away, she's been a bit out of it. Don't pay attention to her oddities." Zarak nodded. He approached Cassandra and greeted her. The woman managed a faint smile, acknowledged the greeting with a simple nod, and then returned her gaze to the fire. The flames roared softly, sending out golden sparks that crackled from the glowing embers, rising upward and fading, like the glitter of a dying fire scattered into the air. "Zarak, Cory, follow me. I've prepared everything," Bill said, and with a brisk step he began ascending the stairs leading to the attic. The spiral staircase, narrow and awkward, wound upward, revealing a dark opening hidden in the shadows. The three of them ascended one by one into a small square room directly above the first floor. Diffused sunlight barely filtered through the thick brown blinds covering a small round window that faced the backyard. Cory and Zarak looked around attentively, taking in their surroundings. Zarak was surprised, but kept his face calm and composed. Cory, however, nearly let out a small "oh" of astonishment from the flood of emotions she felt. "What is this place?" Cory couldn't help but ask, addressing Bill. "Miss March, I realize I never properly introduced myself. That was rude of me. My name is Bill Alexander O'Donoghue, or just—" He quickly pulled a business card from the pocket of his jeans and handed it to Cory. She read it aloud. "Vital Pendragon Samus, White Mage and Psychic." "What?" she murmured in surprise, her eyebrows shooting up as her mouth fell open. Below an elegant black script was a phone number. "So you're that Vital, the one who appears incognito on paranormal shows? I've heard of you. So how exactly can you help me? Zarak didn't tell you?" Zarak shrugged casually, as if everything happening and the question itself were perfectly normal and meant nothing at all. "Well then, I'll explain it myself. Cory, don't be afraid. My methods have never let anyone down. I'm going to subject you to a painless and highly effective hypnosis procedure." Cory visibly tensed, turning pale. "Dear," Bill continued, "don't be afraid. Hypnosis is used by many therapists. It's scientifically proven. You have nothing to fear." "Trust me, Cory," Zarak added. "Bill is the best at what he does. He convinced me, and that should mean a lot to you, shouldn't it?" "All right, you've convinced me," Cory replied. She knew Zarak very well. With his unyielding rationality and deeply ingrained skepticism, Zarak smiled, satisfied. "Okay," Cory went on. "Mr. O'Donoghue, Bill, do whatever you think is necessary as long as it helps me remember everything. I'm ready." "Let's begin," Bill said, though his tone wasn't as upbeat as usual, which surprised Zarak, knowing how much his friend typically enjoyed these procedures. The mage approached Cory, gesturing for her to sit in a burgundy armchair positioned at the very center of the strange, perfectly square room. Cory settled into the chair, finding it surprisingly comfortable despite its bulky size and high, narrow backrest. Bill moved closer to her, standing beside the chair, then reached out to take a small round object from a shelf on the bookcase, which hung from a long silver chain. Bill stood directly in front of Cory, looking into her eyes, and spoke in a measured voice full of quiet calm. "Cory, keep your eyes on the medallion. Gradually your eyelids will grow heavy, and you will fall into a deep sleep. When you hear my voice, you will respond to my questions. When I begin counting, on the count of 3, you will awaken and open your eyes." The mage's calm voice soothed the girl. Cory slipped into a trance, slowly drifting back into the past. Hypnosis allowed Cory to remember everything, and she answered Bill's questions, recounting everything that had happened on that day when Don died. Bill listened intently to every word she said, remaining composed, though a storm of emotions brewed within him. Zarak, on the other hand, could barely keep his composure. Cory's words made his hair slowly stand on end. He was eagerly waiting for the session to end so that he could immediately ask Bill to explain what it all meant. Suddenly the light from the wall lamp flickered. The room turned icy cold. Cory convulsed, her face twisted in terror, and she opened her mouth wide in a scream. Bill immediately began to pull her out of the trance. Cory awoke abruptly, leaping from the chair. She asked, "What's happening? Did I say something terrifying?" Bill pressed a finger to his lips, whispering, "Shh, we're not alone." "Cory, Zarak, don't panic. Stand together and hold hands." Cory hesitated, unsure about taking the first step. But Zarak, always one to act first and think later, moved toward her, grabbed her hand, squeezing it in his own, and put an arm around her slightly, unconsciously protective. Bill began to pace in a circle as if searching for something, listening to the eerie, oppressive silence. Then the mage took a vial of white salt from the shelf, opened it, and began to pour a circle on the gray wooden floor. "All right," he said to the pair. "Get inside the circle quickly, and don't step out of the line until I tell you. And, Zarak, calm Cory down. It looks like she's on the verge of a panic attack. That's the last thing we need right now." Zarak, having learned from experience that Bill could be trusted, grabbed the girl without further comment and pulled her into the circle. The two stood in the center of the perfectly drawn circle, waiting for Bill to give them permission to leave it. Meanwhile, Bill wasted no time, opening a small, dust-covered box and pulling out a golden pentagram, and a fluffy white rabbit's foot that dangled from a black ring. Holding these objects, the mage headed toward the stairs, calling out, "Wait here, I'll be right back." When his red hair disappeared through the doorway, Zarak said, "Don't be afraid, Cory. It's going to be okay." "I'm not afraid," Cory whispered, though her voice wavered slightly. Zarak continued, "You know, after everything we've been through, I believe you." Cory glared into his eyes, her yellow eyes blazing with unrestrained indignation. "As always, Zarak, you always need proof, don't you? Do you even trust yourself?" Cory snapped. "Yes, I trust myself. Myself and a few others. And by the way, Bill is one of them." "Am I one of them?" Cory wanted to ask, but remained silent. The silence was broken by the creaking of old wooden stairs. The pair saw Cassandra. She was slowly but steadily climbing up. Her face was slick with sweat from the effort. She reached the top, then stood in the doorway, raising her chin and squaring her shoulders, before sharply looking around. It was as if she saw something that Cory and Zarak could not. Her eyes narrowed. She glanced at the armchair and then said, "Bill, son, come up here. We have a visitor. And quite a special one at that. It's your great-grandfather George visiting us in person." Bill quickly climbed the stairs, entered the room and embraced his mother. The mage glanced at Zarak and Cory, then turned his attention to the armchair and said, "You can come out of the circle. The danger has passed. Now we're going to have a conversation with my great-grandfather." Zarak and Cory stepped out of the circle, standing behind Bill and Cassandra for protection. Mother and son clasped hands. As soon as their palms touched, it was as if a dense, vibrating chain of energy had locked into place in the room. The air thickened, growing heavy, the bulb flickered, then suddenly shattered with a sharp crack, scattering sparkling shards across the floor. In the silence, a wind whistled near the armchair, its gusts carrying a chill. The glass of the small window turned white with a layer of frost that spread across it. The breath of those present turned to mist. Then the wind subsided, and near the armchair the air began to glow with a blue, ghostly light. Slowly but steadily a figure took shape, growing clearer and clearer. Soon standing before them was a tall, white-haired man with pale skin, dressed in a tailcoat, breeches, and boots, appearing to be in his 60s. His stern gaze swept across the room, missing nothing, until it settled on Cory. "That man is exactly like the one I saw near the forest house. He's the one who warned me about the danger," Cory thought with alarm. As if reading her thoughts, the old man removed his hat. He smiled, and the expression softened, the severity etched in his features. Then the old man turned and looked at Bill. "Well, hello, great-grandson. You look so much like your father, I'm very glad to see you." He fell silent, a frown creasing his high forehead. His eyes glistened. "Don't say anything, there's little time. She's holding me here, and only with the help of this wonderful young woman." He glanced at Cory. "Am I able to be here? I will show you everything I can. I hope it will help." A glow radiated from the old man, growing brighter until it illuminated the entire room, flashing intensely for a moment. Then, the bright light plunged everyone into a sleep-like stupor, transporting their consciousness back to a distant past, leaving their empty bodies frozen in place in the attic. It was a stifling hot night. The wind had died down. The forest, dark and black, was lit by the pale glow of a full moon shining in the sky. George O'Donoghue hurried along a narrow path. The trees grew so thickly that he had to stoop, dodging branches that kept whipping at his face. He was exhausted. He had been walking for so long, and the large sack slung over his shoulder grew heavier with each step. Finally, the forest opened up into a clearing. Everywhere he looked, crosses dotted the land, and ahead stood a large crypt. Fear gripped George. His hands trembled, but he still pulled a sharp wooden stake from the sack, revealing a heavy silver crucifix hidden beneath his shirt. Gathering all his courage and willpower, he moved forward. Bill's grandfather had been a priest, a man with a power that, if others had known about, would have branded him a sorcerer. People, terrified of his abilities, would have burned George at the stake or simply lynched him without a trial, without hearing a jury's verdict. So George had to keep his gift hidden. But now he was alone, and only his power could help him. It allowed him to see, to sense hidden traps, and to avoid the overgrown graves where the eternal dark sentinels rested in their light slumber, lying in the shadows. George moved cautiously. He watched his steps, carefully testing each one. He knew time was running out. He had only until dawn. Samantha was weak, but the hellish creature within her was growing stronger. If it wasn't stopped, a great evil would be unleashed, wreaking bloody havoc. George felt fear, but he pressed on, muttering a prayer under his breath. He knew there was no other way. Only he could stop the creature. "How I wish I wasn't alone," My son is too young to help me, he thought. George had been sent a vision the night before, revealing that the hellish creature, Samantha Hamilton, the colonel's daughter, had made a pact with the devil, transforming herself into a vampire. The girl, once the most beautiful in their small town, had brutally and mercilessly killed her family before drinking a black potion given to her by a black witch who lived in the swampy region. In that vision, George had seen everything that happened through her eyes. He had witnessed it all but couldn't intervene. The colonel's house, the most beautiful in town, had burned to the ground. Samantha had disappeared. But the priest knew that he needed to search for her in the crypt. One thing is certain, he thought grimly. The girl murdered a young apprentice blacksmith. His swollen, pale body was found by a fisherman lying in the bushes behind the bridge. Her transformation was nearly complete, and time was running out. The scene dissolved, and Bill was the first to regain consciousness. He saw his great-grandfather's form fading, growing thinner until he disappeared, flashing brightly one last time like a blue star. Only a whispered moan, like a cold wind, lingered in the air, stretching into words. "I'm leaving. She's calling me. Bill, my great-grandson, find the diary. It will help." Bill wanted to shout, to call out to his great-grandfather, but his throat was dry and tears flowed from his eyes. He just stood there, stunned, until Zarak approached, resting a hand on his shoulder, giving him a light pat, and muttered, "Well, buddy, what do we do now?" Bill forced himself to smile, saying, "We find the diary." Cory and Cassie were trembling where they stood, tears streaming down their faces. The men had to help them carefully down the stairs, settling them on the sofa and offering them hot, sweet tea to calm their nerves. Bill and Zarak, without needing to discuss it, tended to the women like family members reunited after a long separation, like they had returned home. While the women regained their composure, Zarak helped Bill search for the diary. Bill brought down a dusty, cobweb-covered burgundy suitcase from the attic. He opened it, dumping its contents onto the clean Persian rug, and the two men began sifting through piles of yellowed papers and various old documents. Zarak hated dust, as he was allergic to it. So, after pulling out a few thin books, he carefully wiped them with paper towels, before flipping through the fragile pages, reading intently so as not to miss any crucial information. Bill suddenly leapt from his chair, startling Zarak, who glanced at his disheveled and excited friend. "I think I've found it." Bill held up a thick, hefty manuscript that looked like a bound book, and as he opened it, he began to read. As he delved deeper into the text, his expression shifted from joy to a serious, pale look, filled with unwavering determination. Zarak, his curiosity piqued, moved closer to Bill, leaning over to read along. This is what he learned. "Anyone who reads my manuscript, know that I am no longer among the living. My cursed soul is in the clutches of the Nosferatu, and it's likely imprisoned, serving him. I failed. I couldn't fully destroy the creature. I, George O'Donoghue, a pitiful, worthless mortal, could only weaken its power, binding it with the spell of the full moon. But his terrible cat-like eyes, they ensnared my will, and my hand faltered, dropping the blade. I couldn't sever its beautiful head, though I pierced its black heart. But that wasn't enough. This is the end. The creature took my soul. I have one day left before I become its servant. The dawn allowed me to escape, to return home. My mind is intact, but I have only a few hours left to live. My hand shakes. My fingers grow numb. Remember, whoever you are reading my last words. Cut off her head Beware of her gaze, and heed this warning. Do you hear? Beware of her traps." The manuscript ended there. Bill looked at Zarak, who remained silent, confused, and clearly unsettled. Zarak finally asked, "So, what now?" Bill stayed quiet for a long time, then suddenly replied, "Now that you know everything, you must understand. This is my family's burden. I have to see it through to the end. I'm with you no matter what I have to face or witness. I need to see with my own eyes that the creature that killed my brother is dead. It's my duty." Cory overheard their conversation. She rose from the couch and approached them, waving her hands in front of their faces to get their attention. "Hey guys, did you forget about me? I'm in. You're not going anywhere without me, got it?" "Cory, listen," Zarak and Bill began in unison. "No, period," Cory interrupted, not letting them finish. "I've made up my mind." Bill grasped her shoulders, looking directly into her deer-like yellow eyes, and said, "Sweetheart, have you lost your mind? Do you have a death wish? This is like playing Russian roulette. You either get lucky or you don't. Understand? Zarak and I, we might not come back, but this thing has to be stopped." "You listen to me," Cory shouted, her voice a mix of anger and hurt. "I loved Don, and I still love him. You have no right to tell me what to do. You're nobody to me. You're not my father, and I take responsibility for my own life. That's why I'm going. And let that creature run screaming for mercy, because I, Cory March, am coming for her, and I won't stop until it's over." Cory trembled, her words hissing out with venom. Her eyes blazed with a fierce, unwavering determination, and the men realized there was no point in arguing with her. So Bill said, "All right, team, let's get our gear together. Then we'll go over the plan and head into the fight." The next 2 hours flew by like 2 minutes. Bill made a list of all the essentials, and then the trio searched the entire house, attic, and basement, gathering the gear they'd need for the battle. They amassed quite a pile of stuff. A mound of mismatched strange items rose up on the rug, making the room look like the workshop of an alchemist from centuries past or a mad scientist just out of an asylum preparing to complete some wild experiment. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Cory, Zarak, and Bill were ready to begin the hunt. Darkness enveloped the house, the lake, and the car. Loaded with gear, the trio left the warmth and safety of the house. Cory hauled a large black bag that clinked with stakes, sloshed with holy water, and held a bulky wooden mallet. A crucifix hung around her neck. Her face glistened with a pungent yellowish ointment that chilled her skin and smelled sharply of herbs. When Cory had asked, "Why do I have to put this stuff on my face?" Bill had replied that it would allow her to see traps hidden by magical veils. Zarak also had to smear himself with the foul-smelling ointment, but Bill didn't need any such measures. His powers provided their own protection. While Bill said his goodbyes to his mother, Cory and Zarak sat in the car. Zarak asked, "Cory, are you sure you won't change your mind? If you die, what the hell am I supposed to tell your old man?" "The truth," Cory answered simply and directly. Zarak couldn't find the right words to respond. Soon, Bill appeared. He checked his watch, then pulled a long green crystal from the pocket of his leather jacket, an emerald-like gem that looked impossibly large. But such things don't exist, do they? Cory thought, still watching Bill with a sense of wonder. Bill took a road map out of his bag, closed his eyes, and began muttering, speaking in clear, sharp words that neither Cory nor Zarak recognized. With the first words, the temperature in the car rose suddenly. The air filled with the scents of chamomile, wax, and pine. The green crystal glowed with a piercing, vivid light. Then the crystal floated into the air and hovered above the map spread out on Bill's lap. It paused, hanging over Highway 78, then descended, skimming across the paper, leaving a glowing green trail that traced their route. After a few minutes, the crystal's light faded, and it dropped as if its energy had run out or someone had unplugged it. Instantly, the scent of flowers and herbs vanished. Zarak muttered, "Wow." Bill said nothing. He was used to such tricks. Zarak started the car, and they drove along the route the crystal had charted for them. Deep underground, where the air was dry and stale and cobwebs draped a sticky veil over the space, lay a black lacquered oak coffin. Around it, scattered on the cold earthen floor, were piles of small bones, desiccated, half-decayed skulls, scraps of clothing, and rotting, long bird feathers. Suddenly, the stillness shattered with a bang as the coffin's lid crashed to the ground. A gust of cold, dusty wind swept up the dry, ancient figure of a woman, mummified like a relic from the red velvet-lined coffin. Her arms were like whips, her long red dress tattered and decaying. Only her raven-black hair fluttered, dancing in the eerie wind. In the empty sockets of her dried skull, eyes opened, blazing with emerald fire. Her mouth gaped open, and a wail, a call, filled the night with a long, guttural cry. "Free! I am free, my servants! I summon you! Come to me!" Her scream cut off abruptly, and she convulsed, shaking her skeletal, mummified body. Suddenly, as if seized by a tremendous force, her form began to change. Her body filled out, like a balloon being reinflated with life. Bones gained flesh, and her tattered dress transformed into a beautiful gown, looking as if it had just been made. Her skin, once dry as parchment, turned firm, white, and radiant with life. In an instant, the woman gracefully landed on the ground, standing barefoot on the soft, dry earth. Her body brimmed with renewed power, her eyes glowing. A sudden flapping of wings echoed from above. Cawing, 3 black birds landed on her shoulders. The crows croaked softly, and the woman nodded, understanding their message. Then she snapped her fingers, transforming into a thick white mist, which, carried by a devilish wind, rose upward, slipping through a wide opening and vanishing from sight. The Jaguar glided smoothly, cutting through the gray highway with its silent wheels. Suddenly the car swerved sharply, veering to the side. "What the hell?" Zarak asked, glancing at Bill, whose expression remained as calm as frozen ice. "Don't panic, it's fine. We just crossed a magical barrier." Zarak steadied the car with a quick turn of the wheel. The vehicle continued down a bumpy, rutted dirt road. Cory suddenly sensed they were getting close. Looking out the window, she saw the high, bright moon, glowing like a giant pumpkin in the sky. She remembered that it had been a full moon on that fateful day as well. The coincidence struck her as strange, and she turned to Bill with a question. "Hey, wizard, tell me about that spell that's supposed to bind Samantha." Bill, caught off guard, hesitated for a moment before replying, "Cory, I'm afraid you won't like the answer. The spell no longer holds her. After all these years, she's free again. Samantha quenched her thirst when she killed Dawn. That broke the magical chains." "Damn," Zarak cursed, slamming on the brakes. "And you couldn't tell me that earlier, Bill? What are we supposed to do now? What makes you think she won't just change locations and start hunting?" "I think," Bill replied, his voice low and tinged with anger, "that telling you earlier wouldn't have made a difference. But I do know one thing for sure. Samantha hasn't left her lair yet. The ground holds her. The blood spilled on it carries power too. So when we arrive, I'll ask you, Zarak, and you, Miss March, to stay in the car and let me handle it. You'll be safe there." "Not a chance," Zarak interjected. "We're not letting you go in alone. Remember what happened to your great-grandfather? He was alone. We're a team, or have you changed your mind?" "Fine, have it your way," Bill relented. "But with one condition, you do exactly as I say, no improvising. Is that clear?" "Yes, boss," Cory replied cheerfully, exchanging a knowing glance with Zarak. Somehow they understood each other's thoughts without a word. "We're here. See that crooked pine?" Bill pointed out. "I see it," Zarak replied. "Stop there. Remember, beyond that pine lies the danger zone. Her territory. We'll leave the car here and proceed on foot." "Cory, start gathering the gear. Zarak, get the flashlight ready." Parking the car beside the twisted pine, the trio left the safety of the vehicle. Laden with essential supplies, they ventured into the dark, danger-filled forest. Meanwhile, Cassandra sat by the fireplace, the flickering flames casting soft, warm light across her face. She felt cold, and a deep sense of unease had settled in her heart. She wrapped her warm wool shawl more tightly around herself. The only light in the house came from the living room. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded animal, promising rain and a sudden change in the weather. Cassandra thought of her son, her worry for his fate knotting like a lump of cold bile in her throat. "No, I can't go on like this," she thought, carefully rising from her chair, though the effort sent a sharp pain through her back. Taking up her wooden cane, she hobbled, leaning heavily on it, making her way toward the kitchen. Cassandra was about to make herself some coffee, adding a splash of brandy to dull the anxiety gnawing at her heart. She walked slowly across the thick gray carpet that covered the hallway floor. Suddenly, something made her glance out the window. There, staring back at her through the glass, were the unblinking black beads of a crow's eyes. The bird seemed to be watching her. Cassandra stepped closer to the window, tapping on the glass, and the bird flew away, but not before casting a final, cold, assessing gaze that made Cassandra's blood freeze for a moment, turning to ice. Her heart fluttered, and a puff of breath escaped her lips like a cloud of mist. Her anxiety deepened. Cassandra looked around. It felt like someone else was in the room. What should I do? The terrifying thought spiraled in her mind. She headed for the kitchen to get her phone. She flicked the white wall switch. The harsh white light filled the warm-toned, light brown kitchen and illuminated the wooden door, wide open to the backyard. The damp, cold air brushed her face, making her pale. Her mouth opened in an astonished "oh." For a moment she froze in place. Then, as if snapping out of a daze, she rushed forward, slamming the door shut and locking it tight. The phone was forgotten as a sense of danger quickened her pulse, sending a rush through her aging veins. Suddenly the floor creaked loudly and a knock came from the other side of the door. The handle rattled as if someone was gripping it forcefully, pulling it back and forth, trying to break in. The door began to give way. Cassandra grabbed the round doorknob, trying to keep whoever it was from turning the lock. The banging stopped, replaced by a rustling sound, and then everything went silent. But Cassandra could feel it. Someone stood just beyond the door, listening. Then, abruptly, the quiet returned. Cassandra leaned back against the door, her chest rising and falling heavily. She gasped for air, her lungs working overtime. She wiped the cold sweat from her brow with a trembling hand, her gaze wandering to the window. Beige lace curtains framed the window cheerfully, adding a cozy touch to the kitchen. But the window glass groaned against its frame, the sound grating on her ears. A black bird tapped on the glass with its sharp beak, drumming insistently. Its eyes bored into Cassandra with a piercing stare. She rushed to the refrigerator. Attached to its white surface with a magnetic toy was a charm meant to ward off evil. Cassandra nearly reached it when the pop of a light bulb exploding filled her ears. She covered her face with her hands instinctively. The sound of breaking glass rang out, echoing through the quiet, warm kitchen. The window shattered, sending a fountain of razor-sharp glass shards scattering across the room. Cassandra fell to the floor, shielding her face with her hands. A sudden pain made her scream as a shard sliced deep into her delicate skin, cutting through muscle and tendon like a surgeon's scalpel, revealing white bone. In the darkness, panic and fear gripped Cassandra's heart. Her mind went blank, turning to mush. She was in shock, barely aware of her numb body. She had become a puppet, capable only of watching. The room filled with the heavy, frantic flapping of wings. Birds swooped toward her face, the smell of rotting, decaying feathers choking her, making her want to sneeze. The birds flew past her, heading toward the refrigerator. Black clawed feet seized the charm, yanking it off the fridge and dropping it to the floor. The flock then attacked the woven charm, tearing apart the tightly wound strands, scattering beads and small shells across the floor. Their beaks snapped with a mechanical click like they needed oil. It's as if they belonged to a machine, not a living creature, Cassandra thought absently. Claws shredded and dismantled the charm, ripping it to pieces. With the last broken knot, the magic within the charm faded away. The air, once warm, suddenly chilled, swept away by a gust that felt like it came from the depths of hell. A thick fog seeped through the broken window, flowing like water, moving with a life of its own. It grew denser, thicker, until its white, smoky tendrils reached Cassandra, lying curled up on the tile, sobbing and whispering, "God help me, save me." She kept whispering over and over. The fog gathered, rising and taking shape, becoming a beautiful woman. The stranger's cat-like eyes gleamed with malice. Samantha stared directly at Cassandra, locking eyes with her. Samantha's gaze burned, hypnotizing and stripping away the last fragments of Cassandra's will. But she fought back, clinging to her resistance as long as she could. The odds were against her. Cassandra was doomed, and under the relentless force of the hypnotic assault, Samantha shattered her resistance, taking control of her mind and body. Cassandra shuddered, then went limp, drained of strength. Her face froze in the expressionless mask of a lifeless doll. Drool dribbled from the corner of her dry, cracked lips, dripping down her chin and onto her neck. Samantha had learned all she needed to know. The girl was satisfied. She was late. Her great-grandson had managed to stay ahead of her by mere hours. "No matter," Samantha murmured. "At last my power has returned, and this delayed revenge will be all the sweeter. I will bathe in his blood. Not even this reckoning will bring back the years lost. Buried alive in that tomb, the years spent in solitude and silence. The O'Donoghue line will pay for everything, and it all starts with this red-haired old woman, his mother." "Come closer," Samantha commanded the woman lying on the floor. Cassandra stood and approached, obeying without question, like a dog following its master's orders. "On your knees, worthless creature." Cassandra, oblivious to the pain coursing through her wounded body, dropped abruptly to the floor. Samantha ran her sharp, long nails across Cassandra's neck, pressing just enough for crimson droplets to appear on her pale skin. Samantha scooped up a drop with her finger and brought it to her lips, tasting it. Not bad. she thought, before swiftly severing Cassandra's head and tossing it onto the kitchen counter. A bright red fountain of blood sprayed from the neck, splattering the room. Samantha shifted into a white, snow-like cat. The cat approached the woman's body, lapping up the scalding hot blood with her bright pink, rough tongue. Satisfied, the cat purred, licked her whiskers clean, and leaped out the broken window just as the phone on the counter began to ring sharply. Outside, the beams of flashlights cut through the dense, almost solid night. "What's going on here?" Zarak asked, as his flashlight flickered and then went out. "Protection spells or a veil of invisibility," Bill explained, gesturing toward a thick, bark-covered tree trunk etched with strange symbols. "See those marks? This is where the boundary begins, and it's guarded by some very strong magic." Suddenly, Bill fell silent. A sharp, stabbing pain shot through his heart. For a moment, it felt like his heart had stopped. Then it resumed its beat. "What happened?" Zarak and Cory asked in unison. "I don't know," Bill replied. "I have a feeling something's wrong with my mom." He pulled a slim phone from his pocket and dialed his home number. The phone rang, but then it crackled and went dead. "Let's go," Bill ordered grimly. "Keep your eyes open. If you see anything suspicious, steer clear." "What about Cassandra? Is she in trouble?" Cory asked anxiously. "If she is," Bill replied bitterly, "then it's already too late to help her." The three entered the forest. It was so dark they could barely see where they were going. Only Bill moved confidently in the darkness, his mage's keen vision guiding him. He could not only see, but sense the magic hidden within the night. The darkness felt alive. It was filled with thousands of hungry, watchful eyes. Bill knew that if they disturbed those eyes, they would awaken, and then trouble would follow. Cory and Zarak saw a strange shimmering of silvery strands, like a glimmering thread with pink, pearly beads strung along it. Cory glanced at Zarak and asked, "Do you see what I'm seeing?" "Yeah," Zarak muttered. Bill explained, "Those are the eyes of the night. They serve the darkness. They remain dormant as long as we don't disturb them, but if you so much as touch that thread, you're as good as dead." After his warning, Cory became even more cautious, watching her steps closely. Zarak, too, looked around, spotting strange, glowing flowers that appeared like multicolored smoke. Suddenly, the dense gray petals of one flower parted, revealing what seemed to be a spectral eye blinking with a dark pupil. Zarak felt a chill run down his spine. His heart pounded with anxiety, a sour taste filled his mouth, and he had the urge to swallow nervously and then run away. "No, damn it," Zarak thought, clenching his fist. "I've never let fear take control of me, and I won't start now." He had always faced his fears, fighting against them. He overcame his fear of heights by skydiving. He conquered his fear of spiders by holding live, crawling insects in his hands. He had done so much to live without looking back, moving forward with courage. Zarak took pride in that. Bill touched his shoulder and whispered, "Don't look at them. Those flowers are dangerous. They cloud the mind, creating illusions that are hard to distinguish from reality. They can bring your deepest fears to life, driving their victim mad before devouring their tormented soul." "Yeah, this is some real freaky stuff," Zarak muttered through clenched teeth, turning away from the flowers as he followed Bill. Ahead, a clearing came into view, bare and lifeless. The black earth seemed ominous in its emptiness. It felt like taking a single step would cause the dark patch of earth to swallow them whole. Perched on the sloping roof of a forest cabin was a flock of crows. The birds glared at the travelers with cold, hate-filled eyes. Bill was the first to approach the porch. The birds took off in unison, their wings flapping fiercely as they dove toward the group. Quickly, Bill pulled a vial of blue salt from his pocket. He flipped open the clear lid, pouring a handful of grains into his palm. When the birds came close enough, he swung his arm and scattered the salt into the air. A piercing, agonized screech filled the air as the birds recoiled. Their cries, sharp and drawn out, assaulted the trio's ears, fraying their nerves and making it nearly impossible to hear anything else clearly. The night lit up with ghostly sparks. Where the grains of salt touched the birds' bodies, tiny spots glowed with a white-blue light. The fiery disintegration spread over their bodies, causing the crows to plummet to the ground, where they dissolved into piles of black, acrid ash. Bill ordered Zarak and Cory to get out the stakes and holy water, preparing themselves. He drew a long silver dagger from its sheath. The moon emerged from behind the clouds, its yellow glow reflecting off the sharp, clean silver blade. Bill led the way, guided by his instincts. Before long, the path brought them to a cemetery. Graves encircled a large crypt, forming a tight ring. It felt as if they were deliberately blocking the way, watching the unwelcome guests with unseen eyes. A transparent ripple spread across the ground. From deep below came a sound like the breath of a giant imprisoned beneath the earth, bound and sleeping. A sudden gust of wind whipped through the air. White mist gathered silently, closing in from all sides, cutting off any retreat. The only way left was forward, toward the crypt. As they approached, the heavy rusted door creaked open on its own, as if inviting them inside. Bill turned to his companions with a serious expression. "She knows we're here." Our surprise failed. "Zarak, Cory, the most important thing is to keep your composure. Your fear is her weapon. She's an expert at manipulating hidden phobias, playing on emotions. If you have faith, pray." With that, he stepped into the crypt, followed closely by his companions. The air inside the damp crypt rippled like water, swaying to the will of an unseen wind. In the shifting haze, phantom figures loomed indistinct and eerie. Long, white fingers reached out toward them from every side, threatening to grab their hair, to seize and strangle them in ghostly, cold embraces. "Time to take out the crosses," Bill said, pulling out the Star of David, hidden beneath his black sweater. Cory drew out the crucifix she hadn't parted with since everything had happened, not even when taking a bath. Zarak also pulled a silver cross from the pocket of his leather jacket. The mist thickened, spreading through the air, carrying a nauseating stench of sulfur, rotten water, and decaying fish. Cory inhaled the foul air and doubled over, fighting the urge to vomit up her breakfast. The mist enveloped her, obscuring her from view. Tendril-like hands reached out, trying to grab their desired prey. "Pray, Zarak," Bill shouted, reciting a prayer. "Hail Mary, full of grace." Zarak couldn't remember a single prayer, but somehow the words came to him, and he only had to open his mouth to give them sound, letting the prayer spill out. The light of the Star of David shone, blindingly white, and shot like a silver beam toward Zarak's cross. The crucifix flared with holy fire. The combined glow of the sanctified objects spread into the malevolent, dense mist. Where the mist's tendrils met the light, they sizzled, faded, and vanished. The spirits that had inhabited the haze howled, twisting in agony before collapsing to the ground, turning into a thin blue film that bubbled and flowed back into the dark corners of the crypt until it disappeared completely. Zarak held the trembling girl in his arms. Her fragile body shivered with an icy chill. She sobbed, her tears streaming down her cheeks. Cory looked so lost, so delicate and vulnerable. There was a childlike innocence about her that made Zarak think, "How could I have been so wrong? This girl never lied to me. She's incapable of deception." he saw her in a new light. Zarak felt a strong urge to hold her tighter, to kiss away her bitter, fearful tears. But he contented himself with simply holding her, warming her with his solid, reliable presence. Then he took off his jacket and draped it over her thin, barely warm windbreaker. When she had finished crying, she looked up at him gratefully. "Thank you." Deeper inside, the crypt lay rotting coffins, empty and covered in dust. Scattered across the floor were bones and skulls, forming a path that led the group toward the wall. A dark, gaping hole opened up in the stone, leading deep down into the earth. Bill took out a vial of holy water and said, "Drink a sip each." After they drank, he continued, "I'll go first. Zarak, remember, whatever happens, we have to destroy the creature completely. We have to put an end to the deaths and madness that have plagued this place. We must finish what my great-grandfather started. This evil needs to be sent back to hell, even if it costs us our lives. If we fail, this world will drown in blood, starting with our little town. And beyond that, I don't even want to imagine what this unleashed creature could do. Zarak, Cory, if I fall, you have to finish it no matter what. Don't be afraid. Don't look into her eyes. Don't listen to her lies. Just do your job. The most important thing is to pierce her heart and cut off her head," Bill said, his voice fervent and heated. When he paused, Zarak placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Bill, calm down. I'm with you until the end. I'll avenge my brother, or may I burn in hell and be damned right here on the spot. If I'm not Zarak Bishop Sullivan, then damn it all." Cory, frazzled by everything happening beyond the scope of her ordinary understanding, suddenly found it all absurdly funny. "So, Zarak's middle name is Bishop? No wonder he kept that a secret," she thought, struggling to stifle a nervous laugh that, left unchecked, might have quickly turned into hysterics, the last thing she needed right now. She took deep breaths, slowly calming her racing heart, trying to regain control over herself. Bill was the first to descend through the opening. The flashlights went out. The light wouldn't work here. Bill knew the magic had drained the electrical field he could see in the darkness, navigating by the faint glow that came from anything touched by enchantment. All colors turned to shades of gray, with a dim glow where spells lingered. In the long underground chamber, 2 sarcophagi rested. The high ceiling was completely covered in cobwebs. Bats hung from the cracks in the stone walls, heads downward. The sarcophagi were dirty and old. Their once smooth surfaces, now stained with droppings and feathers, still bore faint traces of intricate carvings. "Which one is hers?" Cory asked quietly. Bill didn't have a chance to reply as the lid of the sarcophagus against the far wall suddenly crashed open, hitting the floor with a thunderous noise. A tall figure shot out of the sarcophagus. "Cory, my dear, I've missed you so much," said Don Sullivan, his voice soft and melodic, dressed in a velvet coat, breeches, and tall boots, as if he'd stepped out of another century. His hair was neatly combed, slightly lighter, and beautifully curled. Don Sullivan smiled, his eyes glimmering with red fire, burning against his pale face. The Nosferatu's gaze caught Cory's yellow eyes in its snare. The girl froze, her body no longer obeying her will. Inside, she knew she was trapped. Her mind screamed, but her cursed body remained locked in place, paralyzed with shock. In an instant, Don was beside her. His pale, chalky hand hovered near her face. The creature that had once been Don hissed, revealing sharp fangs from his slightly parted lips. "Darling, I'm so glad you came." Zarak lunged at his brother, brandishing a wooden stake aimed directly at his heart. "Little brother," Don said, "don't you recognize me? I'm back." Zarak's strike missed its mark as Dawn moved with unnatural speed, dodging the blow. Zarak, misjudging his strength, drove the stake into the stone wall instead. Dawn, still holding Cory with one arm, whispered to her, "Sleep." His serpentine tongue darted from his thin mouth, hissing at Zarak. Then Dawn let out a laugh. The undead brother moved so quickly that Zarak barely had time to meet his eyes before cold, powerful hands wrapped around his shoulders. Zarak struggled against the dead man's grip like an enraged lion. But his desperate attempts and blows did no harm to Dawn. "Damn you!" Zarak shouted as Dawn pinned him against the wall. "I'm already damned," the undead replied. Dawn's mouth opened wide, preparing to sink his fangs into Zarak's neck. The stench of Dawn's breath enveloped Zarak, reeking of rot, decayed fish, and the metallic tang of old blood. Summoning his last reserves of strength, Zarak drove his forehead into Dawn's nose. The creature's grip loosened. Zarak continued to struggle against his undead brother, fighting desperately to save his own life. Meanwhile, Bill, trying to help Cory and Zarak, uncorked a vial of holy water, aiming to douse the vile creature in the powerful, consecrated liquid. But before he could act, the lid of the second sarcophagus suddenly flew off. A thin, pale hand emerged, followed by the fully revealed, beautiful yet dead figure of Samantha Hamilton. Bill managed to fling the vial at her, but paralyzed by a sudden, overwhelming cold, his aim faltered, and the vial shattered against the wall. Only a single drop splashed onto the beast's hand. The dead flesh hissed, melting away, making Samantha recoil for an instant before she gathered her strength and locked eyes with Bill in fury. Their gazes clashed, beginning a battle of wills. The mage's mind turned to ice, while the creature's consciousness became a dark, rippling lake. At first, their powers seemed evenly matched, but suddenly the vampire used a hidden ability. She altered the landscape within her mind, pulling Bill into a vision of her past, showing him the memory of Cassandra's agonizing death, the moment Samantha had reveled in bathing in her blood. The horrific sight made Bill's heart lurch, and the pain brought tears to his eyes. He lost control for just a moment, enough for Samantha to seize control of his mind. She ensnared his thoughts, taking hold of his body, leaving only a small shard of consciousness to witness his approaching doom. Samantha's thoughts penetrated Bill's mind. "You know, Mage, I've waited so long for this reckoning. Your great-grandfather hurt me deeply, and you will regret ever being born. You're a pitiful wizard, young, an inexperienced amateur. Did you really think you could challenge me? Me, the heir of darkness? Fool! You'll watch as your friends die one by one, and maybe, just maybe, you'll become my servant. A dog licking my feet, groveling and crawling before me on your knees," Samantha whispered, stroking Bill's hair as she continued to murmur softly. "You'll enjoy it, I promise, my sweet." Zarak caught sight of Cory lying on the ground. Summoning his last reserves of strength, fueled by the fury over his brother's death and anger at the mistakes he could no longer correct, he let out a desperate yell, hurling Dawn to the ground and driving the stake straight into his dead heart. Dawn's body went rigid, flickering with blue-white light before vanishing. As it did, a whisper carried on the breeze reached Zarak's ears. "Thank you, brother." Zarak broke down in tears. He knelt beside Cory, checking her pulse to ensure she was alive. Then his gaze fell on Samantha, her beauty now tainted by a sinister allure. She held Bill in her arms, the mage appearing like a lifeless puppet. Acting on instinct, Zarak grabbed a small vial of holy water from Cory's pocket. He ripped off the cap, sprinting toward Samantha, flinging the water into her face and shouting, "Choke on this, you witch! Burn in hell! The holy water seared Samantha's skin. The liquid bubbled and scorched, her flesh melting away in bloody strips. The vampire howled in agony, collapsing to the ground and quickly crawling into a dark corner, desperately trying to heal her wounds. Bill snapped out of the sorcery-induced trance, jolted by Zarak's shout ringing in his ears. "Bill, wake up! We need you, man!" Grabbing his dagger, Bill replied, "Let's do this, Zarak. You aim for her heart with the stake. I'll take care of her head." Without needing further coordination, the two rushed toward Samantha, now writhing against the wall in a pool of black blood. Her body twitched, her claws scraped the earth, and her red mouth gnashed viciously. The elegance she once possessed was gone. Her skull showed bluish patches, skin peeling away to reveal desiccated muscle. One of her eyes had burst, leaving a grotesque, pulsating mass in its socket. When she saw the two men approaching, she covered her face with her hands as if trying to hide. She hissed, "Please spare me. I can give you everything you've ever dreamed of. Money, power, immortality, anything." "Don't listen to her," Bill murmured. But Zarak didn't need the reminder. He saw Samantha for what she truly was. He understood her real nature, her rotten, black, malevolent soul. Her deceit and hypocrisy were etched into every serpentine feature of her form. Samantha reeked of the stench of a grave, the odor of decay and rot. For Zarak, what he saw was more than enough, and he still owed vengeance for his brother. He swung with all his might, driving the sharp wooden stake directly into her black heart. It pierced through with a soft squelch, like crushing a rotten apple. The stench intensified. Bright red blood gushed from the creature's mouth. Bill swung his dagger at her neck. Another strike followed until Samantha's head rolled onto the black cavern floor. In an instant, her skin turned gray, withered, and crumbled into ash. Where the ashes settled, the air shimmered, the ground shook. Tiny cracks spread along the walls, and a deep rumble filled the crypt. "Run!" Bill shouted. Zarak scooped Cory into his arms as if she weighed no more than a child. The hunters sprinted through the passageway, scrambling to reach the surface, not daring to look back until they burst out of the crypt's eerie depths. Only then did they turn to catch their breath. They saw the walls caving in, the lair of darkness collapsing in on itself. A brilliant beam of white light shot up from the depths, piercing the sky before vanishing into the dawn. The whisper of the wind carried a voice, and Bill recognized his great-grandfather's tone. Free, at last, free. Bathed in the first rays of the morning sun, the friends slowly made their way back to the highway. The forest no longer seemed menacing. The muddy road transformed back into a well-paved path. Exhausted, filthy, and battered, they climbed into the car. "What are your plans now?" Zarak asked Bill. "I don't know," Bill replied. "For now, I'm going to crash and sleep. After that, we'll see. And you?" I don't know either. I guess I'll just try to live. That's what matters most. If you ever want to talk, call me. I'll answer any questions you have." "I'll keep that in mind," Zarak replied. The Jaguar eased onto the road. The sun gilded the smooth gray asphalt. The night had passed, taking its secrets with it. A bright, clear day arrived, bringing the long-awaited light, a light that marked the victory of good. They had won this battle, but day is only a pause. What the future holds, no one knows. Perhaps only God himself. Yet Zarak realized something important. If darkness exists, then so does light. Evil is real, which means that life is far more complex than it seems. He also understood that he had been wrong, especially in his attitude toward the fragile girl, Miss Cory March. Zarak resolved that he would do everything in his power to earn her forgiveness. Only then would he be able to rest easy. The car gathered speed, disappearing around a bend. A sign on the spinning road marker, blown by a gust of wind, flashed by. Fleur d'Orange, 8 miles,